Express.js is by far the most popular server-side JavaScript framework. But what is a server-side framework and how do we use it? Well, those are the questions that we're going to answer right now. So what exactly is Express? Well, Express is a server-side framework that allows you to create server-side applications and APIs for websites. And then these server-side applications can then be used to connect to a database, authenticate users, and they can be used to create login sessions that allow your users to stay logged in on your website. And there's plenty of other different things that these server-side applications can do. So let's go ahead and get started with installing it first, and then we can learn how we can create a server-side application. So let's go ahead and quickly get this done here so we can move on to other things. So find the place that you're going to store your application, preferably a blank folder. Then you're going to open it in the terminal. This can be a separate terminal or it can be the built-in VS Code terminal, doesn't really matter. Then we're going to say npm init. And I'm going to add on here -y. That's just going to say yes for all of the questions. Next thing we need to do is we need to install Express. Now, it's actually very important that you make sure you get the spelling and the actual install name correct whenever you are installing Node packages. So I recommend that you look at the documentation if you don't know the exact spelling or the exact name whenever you're installing any kind of Node package. But I know that we are going to run npm install, and then we're going to install Express, just like this. And we're going to click enter. Now that that is done, we have all of our packages installed here. Now we can close out of that, and we have our node modules folder along with our package lock.json file. And we can move that out of the way. Now we can go ahead and create our entry point for Express. So generally you want to name it index.js. Just like that. That is generally what we consider the entry point whenever we're creating an Express application. And just to be clear, you can name this whatever you want. It really doesn't matter, but generally this is the naming convention that you're going to see most often. But now that we've got that out of the way, let's go ahead and create our first server. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to require the package. So I'm going to save this to a constant called Express. And we're going to set it equal to require Express, just like that. Now, Express right here is going to be actually a function. So we actually need to call Express itself. So Express is going to be called and then is going to return a value, which we are then going to save inside of a variable, and then we can utilize that variable for all of our Express needs. So let me show you how it works. So we're going to create another constant, and I'm just going to call it app. Of course, again, you can call this whatever you want. I'm just going to call it app, and we're going to set it equal to the execution of Express. So this is going to be executed, and the return value is going to be saved inside of this app variable. Now let's go ahead and create a open port that we can listen for incoming requests on. So let's go ahead and say app.listen, and we can specify a port to listen on. So we can specify port 3000, and then we can also pass in a callback function if we want. So we could pass in, let's say, console.log listening on port 3000. Now, if we go ahead and save that, now let's go ahead and open our terminal and let's start the server. So we're going to say node, then we're going to specify the path to our entry point. So that's going to be this file right here that we're listening on and we're creating the server on. So the index.js file. So let's go ahead and run node index.js, and you can see right here listening on port 3000. And you notice we don't actually get our command prompt window back just yet. And that is because Express is listening for any incoming requests. Now, if we want to stop the server, all we have to do is hit Control-C, and that is going to stop the server for you. But let's go ahead and start the server back up. We'll run node and then the path to that file again, and we will click enter. Now the server is running. Let's go ahead and just minimize that down because we really don't need to worry about that just yet anymore. Now let's go ahead and create our very first route. So to do that, we can say app.get. Then we need to specify the path in which we want this route to handle. And in this case, we're just going to specify the slash route. And then we can follow that up by a callback function. And this callback function is going to take in two parameters. It's going to take in a request and is going to take in a response. And of course, you can name these parameters whatever you want. Generally, though, you'll see REQ for request and RES for response. And then inside of this callback function is where we can handle all of the requests, and we can send a response along with anything else that we need to do on this specific path. So let's go ahead and see how this works first, then I'll explain how it works. So inside of our callback function, I'm just going to write a console.log, and I'm just going to write we got a request. But now that we have changed our server in some way, we actually need to restart it for those changes to actually be applied. So down here, we're going to quit our server, and then we're going to run the same thing again. So we just have to quit and then restart the server. Now, I've gone ahead and created a very small basic front end, if you want to call it that, and we are just going to make a basic request. Now, if you want to see the code for this, there's nothing really special. It's just an HTML page with a button and then a script that sends a fetch request to our specific path for this right here. So we're listening on port 3000, which is specified right here. And then the path that we're hitting is the slash path, which is specified right here. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and make the request. And if we click on here, you can see down here in our terminal, we got a request, and that was logged from this console.log right here whenever we hit that specific path. But how did that work? How did that go from the front end to the back end and then log out on the back end like that? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at the request and the response cycle. So on the front end, users will make requests. Generally, this is done by clicking a button or clicking a link or any kind of action that may need a request. Users will make a request and it's going to be bundled up and then it's going to be sent to the backend. Then once it gets to the backend, Express is going to parse it and it's going to eventually hit one of these routes. So depending on the method and the path, it's going to hit one of these specified routes. Then whenever it does hit one of these specified routes, then we are going to handle it using the callback function. Now the callback function takes in two parameters. The first one is the request, and this is the request that's sent from the front end. Then the second one is going to be the response, and this is going to be the response sent from the back end back to the front end. It's a response to the request. So users will send a request from the front end to the back end, then the back end will handle whatever it needs to handle, and then it will send a response back to the front end. And this is how we get the request response cycle on websites. Now, before we call it a day, let's go ahead and create one full request cycle. So we're going to send the request from the front end, it's going to hit the back end is going to do something, and then it's going to send a response to the front end. So my code here is basically the same. There's very little that I actually changed. Back here on the server side, we need to make sure that we add this. Like if you're following along, make sure you add this bit of code right here. This is just security stuff that prevents the back end from completely rejecting the request. Then on the front end, I've just got these two right here where I'm awaiting the response being converted to JSON, and then I'm just logging out the value of the response. Now, the only other thing that we have to do is we actually need to create the response. So inside of the app.get method here, we are going to actually create the response and send it along with that. So we can access the response object and we can set JSON to be sent back to the client. So that's what we're requesting here, is just some basic JSON. So we can say res.json, and this is going to automatically convert any JavaScript object into JSON for us, and is going to be sent back to the client for us. So let's go ahead and just add some basic JSON to this response. So we could say message, and we could just say hello friend, just like that, and that is going to send that JSON right there, that JavaScript object right there, back to the client whenever it hits this specific route. And now, since we changed something on our server, let's go ahead and restart. We'll hit Control-C, and then we will say node index.js, and we will restart that server so that those changes are then applied. Now let's go ahead and send this request. So we've got the page here, and then I've just got the console here so we can see the response come in. So if we click on the button here, we're going to see that this object comes back with the value of message with the value of hello friend. And this is the response that was sent from the backend server here back to the client. And this is a full request and response cycle, something you would normally see in some kind of standard JavaScript application, or something you would get back from maybe an API of some kind. And that is about it for the basics of Express, installing it and creating a very first application. Now, this is just a very small portion of what Express can actually do, because in the next video, we're going to take a look at some of the different HTTP methods that we can utilize when sending requests to an Express backend, and how we can utilize those different methods for RESTful API requests. So stay tuned for that. But if you did enjoy the video, make sure you slap a like on it. Check out the full playlist, link is right down there. Make sure you subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.